I attempted a shading of my favorite artist and I want to share with you the shading process. Feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below and let me know what you think of this shading. These are the tools that I'll be using and they're also available in the description below. So without further ado, let's dive into the shading. With the outline drawing, I usually use the grade method for my outline drawing for high accuracy. And when I'm drawing, I usually use a lighter pencil grade such as the HB graphite pencil for very faint outline drawing. So in case of mistakes, I can easily erase and then correct the mistake. Now beginning with the shading, I started with the eye as usual. I started by shading the dark outlines. So by that, I'm going to shade the eyelid lines, those details on the cornea, the iris outline, and then the pupil outline. And the pencil grade that I'm using is the medium, the general charcoal pencil. I will also be shading the wrinkle lines on the eyelid. Now I'm shading these outlines, or let me say I'm darkening these outlines to basically ensure that they remain visible throughout the shading process. Now this will help preserve these details and will later help me stay accurate when rendering the finer details. I'm also shading the eyebrows. And as earlier said, I want these details to remain visible throughout the actual shading process, okay? As they will guide me during the rendition of the finer details. The next step after shading the dark outlines, I'm going to use the blending stamp to smudge this outline shading, okay? Now this is purposely to make the shading appear softer and smoother. In addition to the smudging, I'll also dip the blending stamp into the charcoal dust and then gently use it to shade the small details or the small features which might prove difficult to shade using the brush. Okay, good. For example, the iris and those intricate details on the cornea. I'm going to shade these small details using the blending stamp. Still using the same blending stamp with the charcoal dust, I'm going to make a light shading of the base layer of the eye. Now, this isn't the actual shading. Instead, this is just a light shading which I personally prefer to do before the actual shading, which I'll later do using the brush and then the charcoal dust. Now this light shading is basically to give me an idea of the tonal values of the base layer to purposely increase the shading accuracy during the actual shading, or let me say the proper shading. This is just a light shading. I'll later do the proper shading using the brush and then the charcoal dust. It also helps me understand effectively the underlying structure of the form before commencing the actual shading. Well, this process isn't compulsory. If you want to, you can skip it, or you can do this light shading using a lighter grade pencil if you're uncomfortable using the blending stamp. Now the next step, let's do the actual shading, or let's do the shading proper. That is when I'll be dipping the brush into the charcoal dust and then gently and gradually enhance the shading for a smooth and a vivid solid base layer. I'm going to start with a small brush. Now this is a very effective tool which helps you to apply the charcoal dust into the small areas, okay? Now this tool also helps you easily target specific areas without affecting the surrounding details, okay? So I'm starting the shading with a small brush, and then gradually I'm going to build up the layers to render a three-dimensional base layer. To ensure smooth tonal transitions, I'll be starting the shading from the shadows and then gradually blend into the lighter areas. Now, I'll switch to the bigger brush to easily cover large areas with the charcoal dust. Now, the bigger brush helps you maintain consistency in the shading across the larger areas, and it's also ideal for establishing the overall tonal values of the base layer. Now, during the application of the charcoal dust using the brush to build a three-dimensional form, you should bear in mind that you can't build a solid base layer after just one application. No, it doesn't work that way. Meaning you have to keep applying layers on layers of the charcoal powder in order to build a three-dimensional form, okay? You need to keep applying the charcoal dust, and you have to do this repeatedly. You need to keep building and building on the charcoal dust in order to render a vivid and a solid base layer. And also start from the shadows and then gradually and gently blend into the lighter areas to create the required tonal values. I'll be shading the base layer of the eye, the forehead, the temple, the ear, and I encourage you to watch patiently to gain insight into shading a solid and a vivid three-dimensional base layer using the brush and the charcoal dust. This will take some time, so kindly bear with me. I always prefer shading the base layer before adding the final details, because I want to be certain the tonal values are accurately rendered, because this is charcoal. Any mistake might be difficult to erase, okay? So let's finish shading the base layer before proceeding to add any final detail. Now we have a solid base layer, so we can then proceed to add the details. Using the medium, the general charcoal pencil, I'll be reinforcing the faded dark details like the eyelid lines and those intricate details on the lower eyelid. I'm going to brush over the pencil shading to make it appear softer. Continuing with the detailing, let's proceed to shade the iris. I'll begin shading the iris by deepening the outer edge, allowing a soft gradient to form inward, which will basically give the iris a more lifelike depth. Brush over to soften the shading and then go over again to reinforce the dark values. Next, let's shade the pupil. Let's shade the whole thing black using the soft charcoal pencil for a very rich dark value. But then let's leave the highlight section untouched. I'll later brighten this part using the eraser. Back onto the skin layer. Now I want to add more depth and texture to basically increase the realism. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to gently shade over this portion using the charcoal pencil to add the desired texture and depth to this portion. This time around, I'm using the ENGROSS Penart charcoal pencil. Now when doing this shading, be mindful and don't press too much on the pencil, because pressing too much on the pencil will basically increase the pressure on the pencil and will likely create unnatural patchy shading, which is undesirable. So reduce the pressure or apply firm pressure on the pencil and then gently and gradually do the shading to achieve the desired effect. I've now switched to the medium rare charcoal pencil to create softer, less intense values and to also build up middle tones more effectively. Brush over to soften the pencil shading, and then go over the shading again to enrich the dark values. Now let's add some texture to the forehead. On the forehead, the dark skin pores are very visible. So in order to accurately capture these dark pores, I won't just shade over this portion. Instead, I'll be drawing patterns of dots and short lines to easily capture a realistic representation of the dark skin pores. And I'm using the medium royal charcoal pencil. Now when drawing the dark pores, ensure these pores you are drawing align with the tonal values and contours of the form to help achieve realism more accurately. Now what I mean is, in the areas of darker tonal values, the pores should generally appear darker and denser, okay? And then in the lighter areas, the pores should be lighter and then more sparse and more subtly rendered so that they don't disrupt the lightness of the form. I hope you carefully watch and observe how I'm drawing the dark pores. On the lower eyelid, I'm going to use the soft charcoal pencil, which is darker, to render the darker values considering how dark this section is. Now lightly brush over the pencil shading to soften its appearance and to help it blend seamlessly into the base layer. Once again, I'm reinforcing the faded eyelid lines as well as the dark intricate details on the lower eyelid. The next step, I'll be adding the highlights to make it look realistic using both the electric and then the Tombow erasers. On the skin layer, I'll be drawing the highlight using patterns of dots, okay? This is to easily capture a realistic representation of the skin pores. I'm going to use the Tombow eraser to erase the sclera to make it whiter. Let's also add some soft highlight to the iris using this same Tombow eraser. You can use the white charcoal pencil to reinforce the highlight, making it brighter. Let's proceed to draw the eyelashes. Now when drawing the eyelashes, take your time and then render each strand individually, okay? This will help you achieve a more realistic and a more natural look. You can again use the white charcoal pencil to add highlights to the hair strands to make it look more three-dimensional. On to the next step, I'm going to render the highlights on the forehead. And in order to achieve a realistic depiction of the skin pores, I'll use pattern dots to render the highlights. You can use the electric eraser for strong highlights and then the Tombow eraser for softer highlights. Now, when drawing the highlights, you should also draw soft highlights around the strong highlights to help you achieve a tonal transition from the highlights into the dark skin layer, okay? This will help you achieve realism and also add dimensionality to the overall skin texture. And also with the eyebrow. Now take your time and then draw each hair strand with care and intention, one at a time, to help you better capture the realism and then the flow of the natural eyebrows, okay? Be patient when drawing the eyebrows. I'm starting with the soft degenerate charcoal pencil for thick dark hair strands. Now I've switched to the medium, the general charcoal pencil, to draw thinner and less dark hair strands to basically add realism and depth to the eyebrow. The next thing, I'm going to use the white charcoal pencil to draw highlights on the hair strands to make it look more realistic and three-dimensional. So try and then use the same technique to draw the other eyebrow, and let's see how it will unfold. I'll be shading the nose next. Now using the medium, the general charcoal pencil, I'll be shading the nostril outline. And then I'll switch to the medium royal charcoal pencil and then gradually map out the dark values of the base layer just to get a fair idea of the tonal values of the form. Moving on, I'll be using the blending stamp to smudge the outline shading to make it appear smooth and softer. In addition, I'll be dipping the blending stamp into the charcoal dust and then gradually make a light shading of the base layer. Okay, good. Now, as I earlier said, this gives me a fair idea of the tonal values before commencing the actual shading. Okay, this helps the actual shading to be quite easy. Okay, but then this is optional. This is an optional process. You can skip it, or you can do this light shading directly using a lighter grade pencil such as the hard charcoal pencil or even an HB graphite pencil. I'm more comfortable doing this light shading before the actual shading. Okay, this is just an individual preference. This process is more convenient for me. Now, on the next step, let's do the actual shading or let's do the shading proper. That is when I'll be dipping the brush into the charcoal dust and then gently and gradually enhance the shading for a smooth and a vivid solid base layer. I'm going to start with a small brush. Now this is a very effective tool which helps you to apply the charcoal dust into the small areas, okay? Now this tool also helps you easily target specific areas without affecting the surrounding details, okay? So I'm starting the shading with a small brush and then gradually I'm going to build up the layers to render a three-dimensional base layer. To ensure smooth tonal transitions, I'll be starting the shading from the shadows and then gradually blend into the lighter areas. Now, I'll switch to the bigger brush to easily cover large areas with the charcoal dust. Now, the bigger brush helps you maintain consistency in the shading across the larger areas, and it's also ideal for establishing the overall tonal values of the base layer. Good. So now I want to increase the depth and the dark values on the sides of the nose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the EP ENGROSS PENART charcoal pencil, and then I will gently shade over this portion to achieve the desired dark tonal value. But then bear in mind and don't press too hard on the pencil, okay? Because pressing too hard on the pencil will likely create unnatural patchy shading, which is undesirable, which is not what we want, okay? So just apply firm pressure on the pencil and then gently shade to achieve the soft dark tonal value which we want. The next step, I'm going to draw the dark pores using the medium rare charcoal pencil. And then in order to easily depict a realistic skin pores effect, I'll be drawing the dark pores using patterned dots. Now when drawing the dark pores, try as much as possible and then vary the sizes of the dots, okay? This will help add dimensionality to the texture and then create a visually appealing skin texture. But then in the dark values with less pronounced dark skin pores, you can gently shade over this portion to still add a bit of texture, okay? Good. Now when doing this shading, be mindful and don't press too hard on the pencil, okay? Just firm pressure on the pencil to easily achieve this soft dark texture. Now lightly brush over the pencil shading to soften its appearance and to help it blend seamlessly into the base layer. The next step, let's darken the nostrils using the soft general charcoal pencil. Let's switch to the medium general charcoal pencil to shade and then increase the shadow on the bottom part of the nose. Brush over to soften the shading and then go over to reinforce the dark values. This will help you achieve a smooth and a vivid dark tonal value. The next step, I'm adding the highlights. And then in order to achieve a realistic depiction of the skin pores, I'm using pattern dots to render the highlights. Now take note, I'm rendering the highlights in between the dark pores, okay? Now this will help me easily mimic the interaction of light on the skin's topography to easily create a sense of texture and depth. Also, when drawing the highlights, gradually reduce the intensity of the highlights into the dark values. Now this will help you create a realistic sense of volume and also help create a gradual transition between the light and the dark values. And then finally, you can darken the dark pores in between the highlights to make the overall skin pores appear denser. Now let's use the same technique to shade the cheeks. Now let's talk about the shading of the beard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip the brush into the charcoal dust and then shade all over the base layer of the beard to give it a solid black base. This solid base simulates the natural density and shadow seen in real beards, especially the kinky beard or tightly curled beard where the skin is often not visible beneath the hair. Now this gives the illusion of a full thick beard. The next step, I'll be illustrating the dark hair strands using the charcoal pencils. To be more specific, I'll be starting with the soft, the general charcoal pencil for thick, dark hair strands. Now when illustrating the dark hair, render the strands densely and compactly to effectively replicate the texture and the appearance of a kinky beard. You can use the medium, the general charcoal pencil, which is lighter as compared to the soft, the general charcoal pencil, to draw lighter hair strands to basically add dimensionality and realism to the hairline of the beard. And finally, use the white charcoal pencil to render highlights on the dark hair strands to make the beard more realistic and three-dimensional. The addition of the highlights gives the illusion of light interacting with the hair, creating a more three-dimensional and a more realistic look.